in order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or a repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you? And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
So when I first started off with just talking about what is radical, I put here a picture of radishes with underneath a description stating advocating for thorough or complete political or social reform. So radish and radical come from the same root word. This is radix, meaning root. And so radical is forming the root. And so when we're looking at structural oppression, right, we have to look more than just the individuals who are in power, but the systems and structures that allow for that power to exist in the first place. So that brings us to this chart of the levels of racism. We have the biggest one is the structural racism, right? This is established on hierarchy of groups based off of perceived race, and this hierarchy that was implemented was designed to allow some races to be empowered, other races to be subjugated. And this informs, structural racism informs systemic or institutional racism. So systemic and institutional racism is the privileges and the prejudices that are embedded in policies and institutions and schools. This could be the public and private sector. This kind of relates to interpersonal racism, right? This is the racism that we see between individuals, stereotypes and prejudice that are acted out through verbal violence. And all of this impacts the individual, right? So this shows up in internalized racism. And internalized racism is a way that individuals view themselves within this structural hierarchy of race. I really like this chart. I always go back to it. So this is a pyramid of racism. So we see the top, right? We see some of the most egregious ways that racism shows up: hate crimes, lynching, anti-immigrant violence, blackface, KKK members, etc. But often there are different ways that racism shows up, more covert ways. So this is white silence, this is tokenism, cultural appropriation, claiming reverse racism, denying that racism even exists. And so this covert racism often acts as a buffer to normalize and permit overt racism to permeate the cultural zeitgeist. I think the root of racism, when we were talking about American, especially American black people, it was first, their first introduction to racism was through their introduction to the United States. They were imported to a continent, awarded second-class status, and this was based off of racist philosophical ideas of white supremacy. I put here an image of the slave house that my ancestors actually lived in rural Oklahoma. And just to show how closely connected and that we're not that far removed from the components of systemic structural racism and slavery. So black people were not awarded the same rights, and in many cases they weren't awarded any rights at all. The right to bear arms was never really meant for black people. Black people were the ones that arms were pointed at. So the Second Amendment's well-regulated militia in the South served as a slave patrol, and it was tasked with capturing runaway slaves, crushing slave uprising, protecting slaveholder property, i.e. slaves. So enslaved and free black people were then forbidden to own guns, and many restrictions were implemented. So in 1740 in South Carolina, black people needed white supervision to possess firearms. In Virginia, gun ownership required white permission. And in Georgia, white men were required to serve on slave patrols. So this system of slavery and domination and violence didn't really end when slavery ended. It showed up in Jim Crow. It showed up in overt racism. There was a spectacle of anti-black violence in the streets. Black men were hung on public display for townspeople to see. This picture clearly demonstrates men casually watching a black man after he'd been hung, and children in the scene. This sort of display was acceptable for children because we really needed for white supremacy to be implemented for indoctrination and social hierarchy to be implemented at an early age, so young children knew that they too were better than the black people that were being hung. The public display of anti-black violence served to reinforce white people's position within the racial hierarchy, bolstering a sense of esteem and a superior self-perspective. Lynchings invaded the South. Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, goddamn. All of these places were sites where black people were continuously being lynched in public spaces to reaffirm white supremacy and to subjugate black people to violence. These well-regulated militia formed police patrols. And those same police kill black men at a higher rate than any other race. We can see that black men aged 20 to 24 are the highest chances of being killed by law enforcement. And we think about racism, we think about the institutional components like law enforcement killing a disproportionate amount of black men, but then we can see the components of the KKK being a white nationalist, anti-black, anti-immigrant militia to assert fear into communities. One might ask, why do KKK members hide their faces? And that's because time after time, we are seeing a connection, a deep tie between white supremacy, between KKK members and far-right rhetoric within police departments. The same police that disproportionately kill black men above all other races. The same police department that was formed to capture slaves is still in bed with the KKK. For Malcom, this wasn't too abstract. He saw black people being brutalized every single day. The brutalization of black bodies by institutions, by police, was something that had become normalized. This is demonstrative by the way that the people in these images are looking at the man being brutally assaulted. Bystanders aren't surprised. Bystanders want to remove themselves from the situation. The shock wasn't there. People were jaded. Black people were brutally terrorized by the police, the members of society that they were told were there to protect them. Even figures like Martin Luther King Jr. were brutalized by the police. Martin Luther King famously was in jails where he wrote letters of Birmingham jail detailing the troubles he had with the police. Not only were civil rights leaders targeted by the police, but also children. This image shows a kid hands up, terrorized as a group of militarized police point guns at his body. Malcolm grew up in this world. He existed in the space where there was a constant threat of being killed until he himself was shot to death at a rally in New York. Malcolm X's family in 2024 sued the FBI and the CIA over his murder, recognizing how the government was involved in killing another black man who preached liberation. Why did they kill Malcolm? What was he trying to build? The answer is black power. Malcolm said, "The time for you and me to allow ourselves to be brutalized non-violently is passé." He said, "Fuck it, we fight back." And he promoted black men, black people, black community members to arm themselves to show that they can no longer be subjugated to anti-black violence, that there was a retaliatory component to black liberation, that we were no longer to be treaded upon by white supremacy. The funny fact is when we saw black men and black people arming themselves in self-defense is when we saw some of the first gun regulations implemented in the country. When black people showed that they too should be able to have an open carry. That is when laws prohibiting open carry were found to be useful in California. But it was integral for black liberationists within the 60s and 70s to arm themselves to state that they were not to be like their ancestors, like they were not to be subjugated. Malcolm and the Black Panthers and other black liberationists were often perceived as being violent aggressors. In the words of Malcolm, he said, "Be nonviolent only with those who are nonviolent to you." This rhetoric was very common with other black liberation leaders, such as Huey P. Newton, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, who he himself armed himself as a way to stand up against white supremacy. Malcolm preached that we could not wait for freedom, that we need to do something and we needed to fight now, because freedom can't wait. We often position Malcolm X and Martin Luther King as polar opposites, these two forces that, like oil and water, would never mix. But we can see that they were two men fighting in the same war against white supremacy. These were men who did not hate each other, but enjoyed laughter, enjoyed camaraderie, who enjoyed the community it takes of all different fronts to combat white supremacy. Yet a false dichotomy was implemented between Malcolm and Martin Luther King Jr. And the false dichotomy is a claim that there are only two opposite choices. But in reality, more options exist. And the two sides, they actually overlap, or they're sharing common ground, just like Malcolm and Martin Luther King. So in this mythic dichotomy, Martin Luther King was peaceful, patient, and respectable. Malcolm X was violent, impatient, irrational, militant. Often we see this dichotomy show up in cartoons, right? We see the dichotomy between Professor X and Magneto being an allegory of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, where Martin Luther King is represented by Professor X, who's really about peace and integration. We can see Magneto being demonstrative of Malcolm X, where he's a segregationist, where he doesn't always preach for peace. This also shows up in Black Panther, where T'Challa, the Black Panther, is shown being a peaceful integrationist, really wanting to connect Wakanda with the rest of the world, while Killmonger is more of a Malcolm X character, where he's more of a segregationist, where he's really looking at the retribution of black suffering and the necessity of reparations. Now, these dichotomies and the media have been integral in the way that we look at Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So these erroneous Martin Luther King and Malcolm X portrayals really benefit white supremacists, and they obscure liberatory movements. And so we really need to think about this dichotomy. Is Malcolm really calling for violence, or is he calling for equal protection? It's important to also bring forth the question, how does this reductive perspective manipulate Martin Luther King's image? It sanitizes Martin Luther King into an obedient symbol, flattening him into a one-dimensional preacher of patience. This perspective overlooks key elements of Martin Luther King, right? It overlooks his condemnation of capitalism, his opposition to imperialism and the Vietnam War, his description of America as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, his belief that freedom must be demanded and not begged for. The state exiles this radical king and replaces him with a sentimental passive mascot, right? A safe Martin Luther King that serves the comfort of white moderates and the white supremacists that they buffer. It's also important to question, how does this reductive perspective manipulate Malcolm X's image? It demonizes Malcolm X as a violent and uncivilized threat, which reduces him to a beast, so his ideas never really have to be confronted. Malcolm becomes everything America fears: uncontrollable, hyper-violent, un-American, too angry, too black.
Don't scare Negroes today with no badge or no white skin or no white sheet or no white anything else. The police the same way. They put their club upside your head and then turn around and accuse you of attacking them. Every case of police brutality against a Negro follows the same pattern. They attack you, bust you all upside your mouth, and then take you to court and charge you with assault. What kind of democracy is that? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of social or political system is it when a black man has no voice in court, has nothing on his side other than what the white man chooses to give him? My brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this, and it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves. They attack the victim, and then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. Yes, sir. This is American justice. Yes, sir. That's right. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail. But if you can't prove that a democracy is not hypocrisy, then don't put your hands on me.